Brazil knows about hosting spectacles. The World Cup, Olympics, a Lady Gaga concert for millions. Next up is the Super Bowl equivalent for environment nerds, the UN Climate Summit, right in the Amazon rainforest. Like any mega event, the conference has put the host under a magnifying glass. And what people are seeing is complicated. A country that fights deforestation while debating a rollback on environmental law. A master at clean energy looking to drill for new oil. So what kind of climate player is Brazil really? And where does it stand with its contradictions? Not gonna lie, the Amazonian city Brazil chose to host the COP30 has proven a controversial choice. Not least because local hotels are cashing in, charging sky-high rates for everything from converted cruise ships to love motels. But what Belém lacks in hospitality infrastructure, it makes up for in symbolism.
Belém is an impoverished city in the front lines of climate change. So it is a city in the Amazon where you see both the key problem, that's deforestation, the impacts. We have an extended fire season. You can also see what Brazil has done to reduce emissions from deforestation, mostly the beginning of the century.
Around 60 years ago, the government of the time saw the Amazon as a place to be exploited for timber, gold, and also for its space. Since then, more than 17% of the rainforest has been razed to clear land, mostly for lucrative cattle and soy. A lot of this happened illegally. But when Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, aka Lula, served his first term as president from 2003, he came under international pressure to slow deforestation. Because cutting down trees emits tons of carbon they store in their trunks. So his government cracked down, with immense success. In large part thanks to his environment minister, Marina Silva. She was one of the key architects of the turnaround.
Nos primeiros governos do presidente Lula, nós chegamos a evitar lançar 5 bilhões de toneladas de CO2 na atmosfera. Evitamos de lançar, sendo a maior contribuição já dada por país até hoje.
The government did this by designating hundreds of new protected areas, like conservation units and indigenous territories. It also improved its satellite system to ramp up monitoring and detect deforestation in real time. And it gave better training to environmental authorities and law enforcement to crack down on these spots. Under the next presidents, deforestation rates started climbing again, especially when far-right President Jair Bolsonaro weakened environmental enforcement agencies. When Lula was re-elected in 2022, he brought Marina Silva back, and with her, a focus on combating deforestation. Because
Brazil has this very particular circumstance that most of our emissions come from deforestation, and most of it illegal deforestation.
The government pledged to end deforestation completely by 2030. And so far, it's heading in the right direction. In 2024, rates dropped by more than 30% across all of Brazil. There's one problem, though, that's gotten worse in recent years: wildfires. Brazil counted more than 270,000 of them last year. They are often started by people trying to clear trees to make space for herds or planting. But climate change can make forests and wetlands drier for longer, essentially turning them into tinder boxes.
In the past 2 years, what we've seen is that the fires, they've been outpacing the control of deforestation.
And there's another obstacle to environmental protection. A powerful agribusiness bloc in Brazilian Congress pushed for a draft law that activists dubbed the devastation bill. That's because it basically aimed to kill environmental licensing. Usually before opening a factory, building a highway, or doing any sort of project that could impact the environment, businesses need to receive approval from the authorities. The goal of the draft law was to change that.
Most licensing would be done through the internet, where the entrepreneur fills a form and submits this form saying, yeah, I would do everything right for the environment.
The bill would also fast-track licensing for big infrastructure projects considered strategic. Think roads or oil extraction. Critics say things could get built before anyone figures out what damage they might cause.
It was a huge rollback.
Lula sanctioned the law but vetoed some of the most damaging sections. Now Congress is working to bring back many of the vetoed parts with hundreds of amendments. There is one original provision that the president did keep, though, the fast track for big infrastructure projects. And this is something environmentalists worry could speed up the process for something pretty significant: oil drilling near the mouth of the Amazon River. Brazil is actually a renewable powerhouse. It has tons of hydro dams and great potential to keep growing solar and wind. 80% of its electricity comes from clean energy sources, but it's also a pretty big oil producer, and it wants to become an even bigger one, jumping from 8th to 4th place. That's where these untapped oil sources come in. The government just greenlit exploratory drilling there.
Of course, even though we're not burning this oil, we're selling the oil for someone else to burn. Therefore, we are contributing to climate change by expanding our oil production.
At the COP28 climate conference in Dubai in 2023, Brazil joined other nations in agreeing to transition away from fossil fuels. A big deal for the world's 6th largest polluter. But the government argues that as a developing nation, it's in its right to explore for oil.
Ficou decidido que países ricos lideram essa corrida do descomissionamento, da redução das emissões de CO2 por uso de combustível fóssil, tanto produtores quanto consumidores, e países em desenvolvimento em seguida.
Brazil is quite convinced that we can use some of the wealth that the oil brings to us to accelerate the transition.
But the irony isn't lost on environmentalists, both in Brazil and abroad.
In terms of, hey, you are hosting COP and you are still in an expansion of fossil fuels mode.
What Brazil is likely to score points with as the summit host goes back to one of its greatest strengths: fighting deforestation. At the COP30, it will officially launch the Tropical Forest Forever Facility, or TFFF. This global fund will pay countries based on how well they protect their forests.
We have a chronic problem, which is that the forests, they are not a value for the trees standing. Actually, if you cut the forest, normally you will get money, whereas conserving won't yield much. So the idea here is to turn this around.
What also makes this fund different is that it takes the money pledged by governments and the private sector and invests it in a financial portfolio. The idea is to pay countries preserving their forests with the returns on these investments. The main fund isn't touched. That way the donations can last in the long run. There is no doubt that Brazil is hosting these talks while towing a fine line between many contradictions, but it also wouldn't be the first COP host to do so.
O que nós vamos precisar fazer cada vez mais é superar as nossas contradições. Elas estão postas no Brasil, estão postas hoje nos países da União Europeia, estão postas em todos os lugares.
The question is if the talks in Belém can lock Brazil and all other attendees into an agreement that will bridge this gap.